Hi, my name's Rob Gurney and I'm Managing Director of Ochresoft, part of the Landmark Information Group. As most of you will know, we provide award-winning workflow and case management services to conveyancing and private client law firms across England and Wales. We're also the first software company to develop a bespoke workflow specifically designed to harness the benefits of upfront information in order to ensure more speed and certainty in conveyancing transactions, which we're really proud of. But this video isn't about how amazing Ochresoft is or about how every lawyer should be embracing upfront information. You should, by the way. Its purpose is to try and make sense of the biggest conundrum in conveyancing, the topic that causes the most concern and tension amongst the profession, the biggest reason why agents often see conveyancers as adversaries, the number one issue that buyers and sellers have with the process, the topic the government are so keen to resolve. Why does conveyancing take so long? I've got 4 key messages to deliver during this session, but before that, I want to give you some facts that are quite startling when you hear them for the first time. Fact 1. According to our own data, the average time it took for a purchase transaction to get from instruction to completion in 2007 was 75 days. In 2023, that time was 123 days, a whopping 64% increase. Now, that's the headline grabber, but when we drill into the detail, we can establish better insights to pinpoint the troublesome aspects that causes this increase. Fact 2. The average time it takes between the milestones of searches ordered and searches received has actually reduced from 18 days in 2007 to 10 days in 2023. That tells us that search turnaround times, whilst they do fluctuate over time and from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, are on the whole getting faster, so we can't really attach much responsibility here. Fact 3. The average time it took from case instruction to mortgage offer received in 2007 was 38 days, whereas that number had risen to 58 days in 2023, an increase of 53%. It's worth noting, however, that this number has actually declined from 2022 to 2023 by 8 days. So it seems as though the corner has turned for IFAs and lenders, and mortgage application timescales are now dropping, which is good to see. Fact 4. When we look at the milestones of inquiries raised and all replies received, we can see that on average, the process was completed in 2007 in 26 days. In 2023, that process had grown to 60 days, or to put it another way, an increase of 131%. How on earth is this possible, and what on earth can we do about it? Well, first of all, having been a conveyancer myself since the mid-1990s, and for the last 4 years working closely with hundreds of law firm customers, I can categorically confirm that conveyancers themselves cannot be held responsible for this worsening situation. It's not like they've consciously decided to work more slowly. Most property lawyers don't get paid until the transaction completes, just like the selling agent, and so it's in their best interest to get completions through faster, not slower. I know this is stating the obvious, but I think it's an important starting point, a line in the sand. We really need to look beyond the easy and cheap shot that gets thrown at the profession, that standards and attitudes have slipped. So my first key message is this. There is a huge mismatch between client expectation and reality, and the gap is getting wider. We live in a completely different world to the one I grew up in, where click and buy is now the expected norm. And I'm not just talking about groceries or pizza deliveries. You can now buy a car online and have it delivered to your doorstep the next morning. The Amazonification of society has generated incredibly high expectation levels when it comes to service delivery, and it's at a level that the property industry simply cannot meet. 15 odd years ago, conveyancing was quicker and client expectations were smaller, hence why it was relatively easy to obtain good satisfaction levels. Now, conveyancing is slower and client expectations are much higher, and it's therefore no wonder that friction, disappointment, complaints, and huge pressure are all factors in the daily lives of conveyancers. Yes, it's true that very few home buyers and sellers would want or expect instantaneous transactions, but it's also very true that they do not accept or expect it to take 4 or even 5 months. So we've got consumer expectations going up like this. We probably can't do too much about that. And then we have conveyancing speed going down like this. Is there anything that we can do here? Well, before you can solutionize, you do need to understand causation, which brings me on to the second key message, scope creep. Landmark have carried out a piece of research, the results of which are again quite shocking at face value. It's suggested that over the past 15 years, the responsibilities falling upon the shoulder of a property lawyer during a conveyancing transaction has doubled. And again, I've seen this firsthand from my time working at the coalface. The complexity of the role has increased enormously, but, and here's the kicker, no one other than conveyancers seem to have noticed. Every time there's a new piece of legislation, every time lender requirements change, every time there's a new risk highlighted, it's the property lawyer that incurs the liability and therefore has to absorb the responsibility. Think about the additions that we've seen in the past 15 years or so. Off the top of my head, Japanese knotweed, solar panels on roofs, help to buy loans, the spiralling requirements of client identity and validation of funds, and more recently, the Building Safety Act and its huge implications on conveyancing. And I'm sure that you could all pitch in with many more. The problem is, these extra responsibilities get added in a piecemeal fashion and therefore fall under the radar. If all the changes in conveyancing had been saved up and then dumped on law firms all at once, there would be outrage. It would be seen as incredibly unfair, and I'm sure that 2 things would happen as a result. 1, the price of conveyancing would have risen immediately, and 2, the industry, and maybe even clients, would have acknowledged the increase in work and made appropriate allowances. But because it's happened bit by bit and mostly unconsciously, neither of these things have occurred. The message here is quite simple. We can't keep adding to the job of the conveyancer and then expecting it to not take longer. That's like moving further away from your office and then wondering why the commute takes longer. So, now that we've established that the role is more complex, what can be done to alleviate some of this? Well, this brings me on to the third key message, which might initially be seen as controversial, but hear me out. Technology is being embraced by the legal profession, but it is not speeding up conveyancing. That sounds counterintuitive, I know, but let me explain. There's some great technology out there designed to help the conveyancer, and I strongly recommend you all to utilise tech and software wherever you can to help ease the burdens. But this is the point. Most tech solutions, as great as they may be, have been devised to solve a problem or address a responsibility that's been added onto the job list. Take source of funds checking as an example. I can remember when that wasn't really much of an issue at all. You would check a bank statement to ensure your client could afford the property, but that was basically it. Then property fraud became a massive issue in conveyancing, and suddenly the profession had to go to great lengths to comply with the new regulations. And then technology came along and provided solutions to assist the lawyer with this task. But crucially, the tech didn't speed up conveyancing, it just made an extra time-consuming task quicker. But the net result is still that the process takes longer than it did before we had to perform the check in the first place. I hope that makes sense. What I'm trying to say is that most tech doesn't actually speed up the conveyancing process, it just stops it from being even slower. I think that's an important distinction to make, as I'm sure you will constantly encounter questions along these lines, because at face value it does seem rather counterintuitive. My personal opinion is that technology will eventually help to speed up the process, but only when it addresses the fundamentals of the job and mass adoption ensues, rather than offering up solutions around the edges. What I'm talking about is addressing the meat and potatoes of conveyancing, the comprehensiveness of the contract pack, the interpretation of the legal title, the reduction or even removal of the additional inquirer's process. Only then will we begin to see significant reductions in property transaction timescales. So where do we start? Well, I can't think of anywhere better than at the beginning, which brings me on to my fourth and final key message. And yes, for those that have heard me speak about this before, prepare to roll your eyes, because I'm going to give you my baker's shop analogy. Okay, so you've decided to open a baker's shop in the town. and your opening hours to customers are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. What time do you start baking the bread? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? You want the bread to be ready for your customers to purchase at 9 a.m, so you get the bakers in at 6 a.m. to get the work done in preparation. So what happens if you only get the bakers baking at 9 a.m? Well, I imagine you have angry customers, stressed staff, and less revenue at the end of the day. That would be crazy, right? And yet, if you think about it, that's exactly how the majority of residential conveyancing is carried out at the moment. My fourth key point is that we need to change the norm from instruction on sale to instruction on listing. There is currently a golden window of opportunity for conveyancers that most of the time goes unutilised because they're not being instructed by the seller at the point that the property is listed. If we can get this changed, lawyers can be baking the bread in readiness for when the shop opens. My idea of conveyancing nirvana is when the seller's lawyer has had the opportunity to obtain and review upfront information, compile the perfect contract pack with a full set of protocol forms and all the associated data and documents ready for when a buyer is found and the conveyancing process is triggered. If we could get to a point where this is the new norm, I'm convinced that we would see huge gains in transaction certainty and efficiency, including a massive reduction in the additional inquiries process, as there'd be very little left to inquire about and nothing for anyone to chase. I'm really hopeful that the National Trading Standards material information requirements will act as a catalyst for this to happen, as estate agents begin to recognise the benefits of having the lawyer on board at the very beginning prior to sale. As a profession, we have a vital role to play in embracing this opportunity for change and to finally start seeing the conveyancing process turn the corner and begin to become more efficient. I hope you found some of this insightful. Keep the faith, and thanks for watching. All the best.